In college, I had a crush on a guy. He came from the autonomous prefecture of Dali, Yunnan, a region famous for its Songshan Mountains and Erai Lake. Unlike most southern guys, he was tall, over 1.9 meters, with sun-kissed skin, a jawline as sharp as if chiseled, and a pair of aloof, cool eyes that carried a devil-may-care attitude. Everyone called him Songshan Erai. He was the campus heartthrob, admired by countless girls both in our department and across campus. I was one of them. But I knew the gap between us was insurmountable. I mean that literally I was a petite girl, barely 153 centimeters tall. Isn't there a saying about the cutest height difference? I thought I'd give it a shot. But I was too busy. To support myself, I started working 2 part-time jobs as soon as school began. I watched as the girls around him changed one after another. I worked even harder, hoping that one day I could save up enough for 4 years of living expenses, stand confidently in front of him, and say, "Hey, I've liked you for a long time. Your next girlfriend, how about me?" That day never came. By the time I turned 30, I still had no clue what love felt like. My mother insisted on introducing me to a man. He was 7 years older, worked as a stunt double, and had a 10-year-old adopted son. A stunt double? Was he a Bruce Lee-level martial artist, or more like Ip Man? Either way, I worried about him having a habit of resolving conflicts with his fists, one kick and I go flying. I'd never even dated, and they wanted me to be a stepmother? But my mother and younger brother pressured me relentlessly. The man was offering a dowry of 300,000 yuan. Disillusioned with my so-called family, I agreed, but with one condition. We'd sever all ties. No mother-daughter, father-daughter, or sibling relationships. We'd be strangers. To my surprise, they agreed. And I didn't go back on my word. The man's name was Gu Jun. Aside from being older, his looks rivaled those of my Songshan Erai. While he lacked that rebellious charm, his eyes had a penetrating, hawk-like quality, sharp, fearless, and intelligent. At first glance, I thought to myself, with a man like this, at least he can't be all bad. Outside the civil affairs office, I joked bitterly. Who would have thought I was worth 300,000 yuan? Don't worry, I'll treat the child as my own. Translation: I wouldn't have kids with him. I'll cook, clean, and use my salary to support the household. Translation: I'd act as an unpaid live-in maid until I'd repaid the dowry in full. That's all. Translation: don't expect anything more from me. Forgive my careful choice of words. He was a martial artist, after all. Gu Jun narrowed his deep-set eyes, studying me for a while. Then he smirked, almost a smile but not quite, and said one word. Okay. I avoided meeting his gaze, biting down on my molars. Since I cut ties with my family, I suggested celebrating our marriage with just the 3 of us, a simple meal. He agreed almost too readily. Realizing I might take offense, he added, or we could have a small gathering. I chuckled softly. I'd be too embarrassed if anyone found out. After all, as a public school teacher, I hadn't even been able to choose my own husband, and had essentially been sold for 300,000 yuan. Just the thought of it made me want to disappear.
Gu Jun seemed to understand.
In a low voice, he asked, "Why didn't you refuse if you didn't want this?" If I'd refused, my parents would have caused endless trouble at my school. With a family like mine, I'd have rather disappeared altogether. When I was 3 years old, I was sent to my grandmother's house in the countryside because my mother was pregnant with my younger brother. It was during the era of strict family planning policies. To justify having a second child, my parents obtained a certificate claiming I had a congenital defect. To prove I was not flawed, I became obedient and diligent, excelling in my studies. In every township-wide exam, I ranked first. Eventually, the school contacted my parents, urging them to transfer me to the city for better educational opportunities, as the disparity in teaching quality between rural and urban areas was immense. In high school, my parents finally brought me back to the city. There, every student had access to extra tutoring, but I relied on my own efforts and successfully gained admission to a prestigious 985 university in Beijing. My mother, however, declared that they could only support my tuition because they needed to prioritize my brother's education. I was told to cover my own living expenses through work-study programs. I had already realized the truth. The claim about my defect was merely an excuse for my mother to have another child. I was the sacrifice in her preference for sons over daughters. What they didn't know was that years of malnutrition had left me shorter than most girls my age, nearly turning me into a real defect. Fortunately, the university was kind to impoverished students, offering many work-study opportunities. I also took on various part-time jobs outside of school. By my second year, I proudly told my mother, "Mom, I've earned enough to cover 3 years' worth of tuition. You can focus entirely on my brother now." It was instinctive for me to seek my mother's approval. I craved a family with parents and a sibling, fearing they would abandon me otherwise. My mother and father were shocked, their eyes wide with disbelief, which soon turned to delight. My mother then said, Xiao, your brother is in high school now. He needs tutoring in math, English, physics, and literature. It's so expensive. Could you lend us your tuition money? I'll repay you when it's time to pay your fees." Without hesitation, I agreed. I was even proud that my mother was asking me for help. The next semester, I earned enough to cover my tuition again, and my mother repeated her request. In the following years, it became an expectation. Thus, throughout my 4 years of university, I was constantly working part-time and had no time for anything else, including pursuing my Songshan and Arai. But he found his way to me instead. One day, I was late to Professor Wang's class. By the time I arrived, all the seats were taken. Professor Wang's lectures were always popular, even drawing students from other departments. I scanned the room twice, but couldn't find a spot. Then, my Songshan and Arai waved at me, smiling with eyes that sparkled like diamonds. I rushed over, thanking him profusely. Before I could sit down, he stood up and said to someone behind me, "You two can sit here. I'll find a spot elsewhere." I turned around to see a long-haired female student following close behind me. It turned out I was mistaken. He wasn't calling me, but the girl behind me. Embarrassed, I felt as though my toes were carving grooves into the lecture hall floor. My face burned crimson. Back in my dorm room, I vowed to my roommates that I would save up enough money to pursue my Songshan and Arai. We all burst into laughter, each of us admitting to harboring a similar dream. It seems everyone has a Songshan and Arai in their heart. By the time I graduated, my mother appeared unexpectedly at my university. With tearful eyes, she begged me to return home. She said it was unsafe for a girl to be far from her parents, especially after marriage, when I'd need a home to turn to if mistreated. Half coaxing and half dragging me, she brought me back to take the teacher qualification exams in my hometown. I must have agreed to it, otherwise, she couldn't have forced me. But I wasn't happy about what came next. In my first year of work, she persuaded me to take out a loan to buy a house, arguing that my job came with housing benefits, making it practical. Then, when my brother graduated from university, he moved in, claiming it was inconvenient to live at home with a girlfriend. I continued paying the mortgage while he lived there. My parents remained silent, treating it as a matter of course. My mother later said, Xiao, you're a girl and will marry eventually. Who would marry your brother if he doesn't have a house? Can you transfer the property to him? The family will always keep a room for you. Even my brother rarely showed affection, but this time he hugged me and pleaded, Sis, my dearest sister. Lena and I have been dating for 4 years and she's pregnant. She won't marry me without a house.
Please help me.
I'm your only brother, after all. The barren wasteland of familial love suddenly blossomed. Dazed, I obediently went to the real estate office and transferred ownership. I moved into the school. As I settled into my makeshift home at work, I realized my parents had always treated me as a cash cow, a tool to support my brother. I swallowed my grievances. According to the rules, my family lives locally and the school doesn't provide accommodation. So, I cleared a spot for a bed in the school's storage room, and the school turned a blind eye to it. I managed to squeeze in a desk today, added a chair tomorrow, and eventually I even brought in a bookshelf. The logistics manager protested once, but I smiled and said, I treat this school like my home. I knew this was a bit shameless, but there was no place for me at home. The room my mother had promised me ended up being my nephew's bedroom. Fortunately, I was busy. The school follows a large cycle system, where teachers stay with the same group of students from 7th grade through to graduation, so the teaching quality is immediately clear. I was new to teaching, without much experience, but I had energy. I worked tirelessly, starting early and staying late, always with the students, believing that time and results would be directly proportional. 2 4-year cycles later, my reputation improved, but my love life got delayed. Actually, it wasn't so much delayed as I simply hadn't met my Songshan Arai. It's just that simple. My mother introduced me to someone though, a 50-year-old boss with a son my age. I don't know what promises my mother made to him, but when I rejected him, she came to the school and made a scene with the teachers and students treating it like a show. With no other choice, I went straight to that boss and wickedly said, "If you dare marry me, I'll dare to seduce your son. Let's see how your family handles the chaos." That did the trick. The boss went around saying I wasn't attractive and that I lacked good character. I can't say much about my character, but he wasn't wrong about my looks. At 5 feet 3 inches, wearing glasses, and always dressed in black suits, I looked like a child pretending to be an adult. Sigh. It's true that I wasn't much to look at. Short, skinny, pale, and definitely not cute.
Still, things settled down.
I was now teaching a graduating class, barely finding time to breathe, always at school. When I sent these students to top high schools with excellent results, I was promoted on the spot, named an outstanding teacher on Teacher's Day, and received a bonus of 50,000 yuan. That day, my mother called after a long time. "Xiao Xiao, now that you've sent the graduation class off, can you finally take a breath and come home? I'll make you something delicious." Thinking about it, I hadn't been home for a long time. Then came the introduction of Gu Jun, with a dowry of 300,000 yuan. If I didn't marry him, my mother seemed ready to take drastic measures. Countless needles of pain pierced my heart. My brother's family also kindly advised me, though I didn't hear a word clearly. My mother wouldn't stop until she squeezed out every last bit of my remaining value. Besides, if I really wanted to find someone I liked, as long as there wasn't a huge dowry, my parents would have messed it up. They'd been eager to ask for a dowry of hundreds of thousands all along. Marry him? With Gu Jun's looks, I wouldn't be losing out.
I went along with it.
Tears fell as if they were free, but I wiped them away, wiping off all the filters of family affection, seeing my parents' biased favoring of sons over daughters, and after a while, I found my voice. I'll marry, but my condition is to sever all ties. No mother-daughter relationship, no father-daughter relationship, no sibling relationship, and we'll never have contact again. If they didn't agree, I'd still want to believe that they were doing it for my own good. Ha, they agreed. The greatest sorrow is a dead heart. The greatest sadness is silence.
Just as they wished.
As my thoughts settled, Gu Jun was still standing in front of me, waiting for me to answer why I didn't refuse. Why should I refuse? On our wedding night, discussing why we didn't reject this marriage seemed pointless. I changed the subject. I've never been in a relationship and I don't understand men. I hope you can give me some time to adjust. In other words, I wanted to sleep by myself. All right. This man is straightforward. He went straight to the guest bedroom. 2 people who have met less than 5 times. One dares to marry, the other dares to marry too. Have you ever heard of such a thing? But why do I feel it's worth it to sever family ties? Besides, who else would I marry except for my Songshan Arai? What does Gu Jun want? Logically, with his looks, it wouldn't be hard for him to find a young girl. Why would he offer a dowry of 300,000 yuan to marry me? Is it because I'm small and easier to control? In early winter, the night was as cold as water. I instinctively went to check on his son, Xiaohu, to see if he had kicked off his blanket and to make sure he wouldn't catch a cold. Gu-jun was also there. I awkwardly backed out. The next morning, I made breakfast. If you're busy, I can take Xiaohu to school and pick him up after class. I'll bring him back after work. Gu-jun was wiping his wet hair, a drop of water running down his jawline, his Adam's apple, and down his chest, revealing a hint of abs. He wasn't as tall as Songshan Arai, but close to 1.8 meters, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. Charming. I didn't look up, my gaze following the water droplets until I noticed a deep scar above his waist, with another one nearby, and corresponding ones on his back, clearly visible. Shocking. Is he a soldier with real scars? I was both terrified and curious. I waited for an explanation. He suddenly smiled and took out a card. This is my salary card. It'll be used for family expenses from now on. Trying to change the subject, I didn't take it. Tell me about your scars. How did you get them? He lowered his eyes. I've never fought in battle. How old are you to still be in battles and get injured? He raised his hand. Teacher, I'm sorry. Then, he casually pressed the salary card into my hand.
Take it.
It's been changed to your name, and the password is your birthday. He had prepared this in advance. I couldn't refuse, so I took it and tucked it away. Even after I turned to leave, I felt like there were two burning beams of light on my back. Xiaohu cheerfully grabbed my hand and asked, Auntie, does that mean I'll be under your care from now on? I replied, Is that okay? Dad says you're the best teacher, and you'll take good care of me. So, he married me to take care of the child. It felt somewhat relieving, but also a little sad. I glanced at the man, who was gently looking at me. Our gazes met in the morning light, and the room seemed to shine with brilliance, making my heart skip a beat. Xiaohu finished school early, and as per our arrangement, I went to pick him up and took him back to school. It happened to be during our self-study period. This semester, I had just started teaching 7th graders. The students hadn't yet developed good study habits, so during every self-study session, I stayed with them. I placed Xiaohu in the last row to do his homework. Gu-jun texted me, You're working hard. I sent him a video of Xiaohu doing his homework, thinking that was what he was worried about. Xiaohu was very well behaved. After finishing his homework, he read the extracurricular books I'd given him. If he didn't understand something, he asked me. I secretly prepared some snacks for him. Watching him eat so cautiously reminded me of my own neglected days back in the countryside. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to care for him. It wasn't about maternal love or about Gu-jun. It was just about wanting to take care of him. Over a month passed. One evening, Gu-jun said he wouldn't be home for dinner, and Xiaohu said he wanted to eat Pizza Hut. After eating, he actually fell asleep. I carried him home, which wasn't far, just a few steps. The sound of my high heels tapping against the concrete floor echoed, clear and melodious. The neon lights were colorful, like opening a box of jewels, and I felt a sense of satisfaction inside. I had a home now, a family of 3. No need to look for Songshan Arai. I had my own home. Years later, I still think about this. With Xiaohu, I am a mother. With Gu-jun, I am a wife. And there is a light, which is my home, legally protected. This feeling is so solid and satisfying. I bent down, and Xiaohu, now 10 years old, wasn't much shorter than me. I was almost carrying him as we walked. As we neared the entrance of the neighborhood, suddenly a shadow rushed over and picked up the child from my back.
He's so heavy.
Why didn't you wake him? In the dim light, I saw that Gu-jun's eyes were filled with concern. I couldn't help but recall a line from a song. You are more beautiful than the stars. Was I being too sentimental? Xiaohu slept in his arms as I couldn't straighten up for a long time. He gently asked, Is it uncomfortable? He quickly took us home, settled Xiaohu, and then took off his clothes and rolled up his sleeves, revealing his muscular arms. What are you doing? I asked, watching him walk towards me. I instinctively stepped back, but he caught me in one swift motion and gently pushed me onto the bed. "Let me give you a back massage." The warm palms of his hands penetrated my skin, and my body unconsciously relaxed. Long hours of wearing high heels and standing had caused a bit of a herniated disc in my lower back. At that moment, with his gentle massage, every pore felt tingly. "Xiao Xiao, your heels are too high. Standing for a whole class must be so tiring." His voice, warm and soothing, cut through the dim light. I hummed. I'm compensating for my lack of height with heels. He seemed to smile, his voice full of charm. The concentrated essence is all there. Plus, you're well-proportioned. You look so young, like a college student. Is this a compliment? I guess so. He continued, "Xiao Xiao, what kind of partner do you want?" My Songshan arrived flashed before my eyes, but suddenly, I couldn't quite remember what he looked like. My heart sank. After 8 years, he was beginning to blur. It's not my fault. There was never much of an intersection. There wasn't much to remember. It's no surprise I've forgotten. I just hope that in my next life, I'll be born into a good family, live without hardship, and have time to chase love. Even if I can't attain it, I will have no regrets for having tried. Right now, telling Gu Jun about this feeling would only make him laugh at me. But I didn't expect his deep voice to continue. "You liked the boy from Songshan Arai, but didn't have the time to pursue him." He paused for 0.1 seconds. "I think it wasn't enough love. Otherwise, you would have chased after him even without food. Why wait to eat first? By the time you're done, that cucumber's already cold. Also, he changes girlfriends like changing clothes. He didn't even see you were heartbroken, and he was chatting with his friends about queuing up. How much homework has he done? He even knows about my embarrassing college moments. Maybe, just as he said, it wasn't love, or else there wouldn't be so many excuses." I awkwardly curled my lips into a smile, retreating a bit. "So, what kind of person do you like?" The man paused, then answered, "Beautiful, intelligent, independent, gentle, reasonable, kind." Too abstract. It doesn't quite match me. I quickly sat up. "Thanks, it feels a lot better now." But to my surprise, he pushed me back down again. "Miss, why don't you try another round?" The air had turned a bit ambiguous. I stood up again. "Sorry, miss, can't do it," I said with a playful tone. Under the orange light, he lowered his gaze, his surroundings still enveloped in lingering loneliness. He adjusted the sofa cushion in silence. I wasn't doing much better myself, tossing and turning, unable to sleep, obsessively thinking about the face of the boy from Songshan Arai. I suddenly wanted to know how he had been living for the past 8 years. I took out my phone and found the long-muted class group chat. It was eerily quiet, as though it had been disbanded. Scrolling through the messages, only a few people were still active, none of them him. I glanced at the members' nicknames, none of which seemed familiar enough to be him. In an instant, I chuckled. It seemed like I hadn't really liked him that much. Otherwise, why weren't we even friends? A week after the massage incident, I was walking out of the school gate with Xiao Hu and Gu Jun approached, handing me a set of car keys.
"You drive."
"I'll sit beside you." I noticed the car was a new model. I quickly shook my head. I'm not good at driving. I only got my license a couple of years ago and haven't really driven much. "I know," he said softly. "That's why I bought you this one. It's durable." "Gu Jun, I can't accept such an expensive gift," I said, feeling uneasy. This marriage, which had cost 30,000, felt too much already. How could I ask for a car worth hundreds of thousands? He pressed his lips together. "I need to ask something from you. The money for the car is from my parents." It occurred to me then that, in all the time we'd been married, this was the first time he'd mentioned his parents. I'd asked him before, and he'd told me they lived abroad. I even asked Xiao Hu, and Xiao Hu said he'd never met them. I may have to leave for a while. I'm going into a film production. It could be a few months, or as long as a year or more. You'll have to take care of Xiao Hu for me. The car should make things easier. It was nice of him to make sure I had a car for Xiao Hu, and I felt a sense of comfort. That evening, he cooked dinner. Afterward, I handed him his card. Here, you take it. My salary is enough for Xiao Hu and me, but you need to take care of yourself. His eyes reddened, and the warmth in his gaze softened. He pushed my hand away. I don't need it. If there's an emergency, the contact number is on the nightstand. Then he turned to Xiao Hu. Son, you have to listen to your aunt and make sure to protect her. I felt a mix of emotions at that moment. That night, it seemed like he'd wound up a spring. After dinner, he washed the dishes, mopped the floor, and even washed Xiao Hu's clothes. I wasn't sure if it was just out of habit or if it was something he intended to do, but he even hand-washed my shirt. He was only wearing a pair of pants. Under the light, his broad back and the well-carved scars on his body looked like intricate sculptures. I couldn't help but let my gaze linger, saliva almost escaping my mouth. As he turned around, his solid abs caught my eye, and I couldn't resist reaching out to touch them, just once. He froze, his eyes lighting up, his breath soft and warm. What are you doing? I turned bright red, fumbling with my hands. Helping. I awkwardly darted around him, adding detergent and rinsing with water, flustered. He grasped my hands, his voice serious. Remember, if anyone bullies you, fight back. If you're upset, say no. It dawned on me then he was probably talking about my family. Don't worry, I said. I've already severed ties with them. Also, he hesitated. Also what? If we meet in public, we'll pretend we don't know each other. The air froze for a moment. I looked up at him. Are we going to pretend not to know each other in public? Is that what you want to say? He avoided my gaze, lowering his eyes. If I talk to you, you can act like you don't know me. If I don't speak, just ignore me. I dropped the shirt I was holding. Fine, we'll pretend we don't know each other. Later, he stood silently behind me as I continued grading papers, as if pretending he wasn't there. I ignored him, continuing with my work. No matter how handsome he was, it didn't matter. He wasn't Songshan Arai, so what was the point? The next morning, as I left with Xiao Hu, I could feel his gaze on me, as though he was a student who had done something wrong, waiting for a reprimand. My heart softened. After all, he was leaving for the set, and I didn't know when he would return. It was best to let him go in peace. Gu Jun, don't worry. I'll take care of Xiao Hu and the house. His eyes glistened, and I could almost see tears. His voice was rough as he spoke. I know. Thank you. For the first time, he pulled me into a hug, his hand pressing the back of my head into his chest. I heard his steady heartbeat, and an unfamiliar flutter stirred in my chest. It seemed like an eternity passed before Xiao Hu spoke up. Daddy, Auntie, if we don't leave now, we'll be late. We quickly pulled apart. His ears were bright red. It turned out that I wasn't the only one who had feelings. Gu Jun left without even a phone call. Xiao Hu and I, however, were living quite freely. On weekends, I enrolled him in various extracurricular activities: taekwondo, horse riding, rollerblading, and drawing. His favorite was horse riding. The horse wasn't small, but he jumped on it with ease. I suspected he had ridden before, so I asked him. He mysteriously replied that he and Gu Jun had lived on a grassland for a year. I was stunned. This sounded like something out of a TV drama. After the class, I chose his favorite food, and we indulged in a big meal. Then, one day, as we were leaving the restaurant, I ran into my parents and my brother's family. When my brother saw my car, his eyes lit up, and he rushed over. Sis, when did you buy a car? A Land Rover. I quickly explained, it's not mine. You're driving it, so it's yours. Sis, let me borrow it for a couple of days. You can use my sedan. I immediately lost my temper. I told you it's not mine. Why would I trade? My parents joined in, still supporting my brother. What's the harm in letting him borrow it for a few days? You cut ties with us after you got married. I didn't even bother you about it. Isn't 30,000 enough for 10 months of rent? In over 5,000 years of history, you probably couldn't find parents like mine. Years of resentment flooded back, and I cried out, "Did you ask me if I wanted to be your daughter? Did you ask if I wanted to live in this family?" Slap. My dad struck me, and my world went black for a moment. Xiaohu immediately pushed my father away, saying, "Don't hit, auntie. You little brat, according to seniority, you should be calling me grandpa," my dad said, raising his hand. I instinctively shielded Xiaohu with my body, and I took another slap on my back. Xiaohu ran off, took out his phone, and dialed someone, shouting, "Uncle Wang." I couldn't care less about anything else, and began struggling with my brother. He was pulling the car keys. "Just 1 month. 1 month, and I'll give it back." Giving him the car would be like throwing meat to a dog. I clenched my hand around the keys and wouldn't let go. My mother rambled on, but in the standoff, a police officer suddenly ran over and grabbed Xiaohu, sternly shouting at my brother, "Are you robbing her in broad daylight?" My brother let go and awkwardly smiled. "She's my sister." Xiaohu pointed at my brother and said, "He's a bad guy," stealing Andy's car keys, then pointed at my dad. "He hit Andy too." The officer's face darkened, his eyes sharp and full of authority. He barked at my brother, "Step back, step back." My brother immediately deflated, no longer showing any arrogance, but my mother tried to step forward. The officer pointed at her, "No one approaches without the person involved's consent." I replied coldly, "Officer, I don't know them." I opened the car door with Xiaohu, hearing the officer's loud reprimands. "If you continue to harass her, I'll report you to the station." I exhaled a sigh of relief. If I had a choice, I wouldn't want such a family. A small hand reached out, holding a tissue. I felt embarrassed to realize I was still crying and sheepishly asked, "Did you call the police?" "Andy, didn't you forget Dad left us a number? It's Uncle Wang's. If there's anything, just contact him. If there's anything, call the police." That's right. But it doesn't seem that simple. Uncle Wang believed in us without question, didn't ask anything, and came immediately after Xiaohu called, ready to stand by us. Suddenly, I had 100 questions in my mind. The stand-in is just a substitute, never revealing his face. It wouldn't be that strict to act like he doesn't know us in public. Not even being able to make a call, needing to contact someone else in case of trouble. Especially since the teacher said Xiao, who only transferred this year. Where did he live before? Not long after Xiaohu and I returned home, there was a knock at the door. Just as I was about to open it, Xiaohu ran out of the room, unusually alert. "Auntie, check who it is first." Suddenly, I remembered that every time someone came over, he was always the first to remind me to check who it was. One time, it was a delivery, and he told the delivery person to leave it at the door, observing for a long time before letting anyone in. I even joked, "It's like we're filming a spy drama." This was not something a 10-year-old should be doing. I listened to him and checked the peephole. It was Uncle Wang from earlier, so I opened the door. Xiao, who excitedly rushed over. "Uncle, you were so cool just now." Uncle Wang patted his head and looked at me. "Sister-in-law, are you okay?" I thought he was just trying to understand the situation, so I briefly explained my relationship with my parents. Uncle Wang paused for a moment, then said, "If they come to harass you again, just let me know. I'll talk to them." He seemed very familiar with Xiaohu. The two of them were in the room playing, and I could hear nothing from the living room. When Gujun had been gone for half a month, I sent him a WeChat message but got no reply. Wondering why, I called him but his phone was off. I asked Xiaohu, "Why is your dad's phone off? Is there any danger?" Xiaohu wasn't worried at all. "Dad turns off his phone when he's working. He's unreachable." I thought, what kind of stand-in needs to turn off his phone for months? The only explanation is that he changed his number and I don't have it. I had been married to Gujun for over 3 months, and he had never introduced me to any of his friends, not even his parents. Yet, they seemed to treat me well. The car was a gift from his parents, and Uncle Wang appeared with just one phone call. The card Gujun gave me had a salary deposited into it every month, sometimes in full amounts, sometimes partial. Even actors don't always get a fixed salary, let alone a stand-in. Besides, He didn't look like an actor at all. Suddenly, it struck me, this was it. A person who could have a police officer available at any moment couldn't be doing an ordinary job. That explained everything. To stay hidden, he took Xiaohu to an unfamiliar city, cutting off all contact with friends and family because of his job. Right now, he could be in some city, mingling with criminals, working undercover in a drug syndicate, or dealing with human traffickers. That was his job. And the stand-in?
He was just a decoy.
The door opened, and Uncle Wang came out humbly saying, "Sister-in-law, you've worked hard. I'll be leaving now." I blocked his way. "Is Gujun okay?" He hesitated for a second before quickly answering, "Of course." "Then tell him I'll take good care of Xiaohu. He needs to protect himself. I'm waiting for him to come back." I suddenly felt tears welling up in my eyes, my voice choking. Xiao Wang paused for a moment, speaking hesitantly. "Sister-in-law, my orders are to protect you and Xiaohu. There's GPS in your car and Xiaohu's watch. If you go off the designated route, I'll be alerted, so you can rest assured that I'm always nearby." He fumbled a bit and said, "Sister-in-law, can we please agree that Xiaohu won't ride horses anymore? Horses can get spooked, accidents happen, and there are too many uncontrollable factors. As for rollerblading, it's too risky with so many people around. It's better to be safe than sorry. No more of that, not even once." I looked at Xiaohu. He pursed his lips. "Auntie, just now Uncle Wang asked me if I could stop the lessons. I agreed. This weekend, I'll stay home and study with Auntie." I still couldn't control my tears. Many people sacrifice not just for themselves, but also for their families. In this materialistic world, not all jobs can be measured by money, and not all sacrifices are seen. One of my favorite quotes is, "The silkworm's silk is exhausted only with its death, and the candle's tears dry only when it's burned out." Isn't that the reality of Gu Jun's job? I hugged Xiaohu. "Son, I will teach you everything I know, and we'll wait for your dad to come back." At that moment, a surge of righteousness flooded over me. Whether there's love or not, it didn't matter. I no longer took Xiaohu to public places. I went straight home after work. In the evenings, I taught him lessons covering 4th and 5th grade materials. He was more mature and smarter than most children his age. I also learned some online games and spent my spare time playing with him. He was outgoing but kept a certain distance from his classmates. I suddenly felt a deep ache for the 10-year-old boy. How much had he endured to become so sensible? That day, on the 4th grade exam, he scored 80 points. My voice cracked with excitement, and my eyes grew teary. "Son, next year when you take the middle school entrance exam, I want you to enter our school earlier so that I can see you 24/7. He looked up at me. "Auntie, why do you cry so much?" "Do I cry a lot?" I hadn't cried when I couldn't see my parents for years in the countryside. I hadn't cried when my parents repeatedly took my work-study money. I hadn't cried when the house was transferred to my brother. I hadn't cried when my mother turned my room into my nephew's playroom. I hadn't cried even when I missed the chance to pursue a classmate from Songshan Arai. But after marrying Gu Jun, I had cried several times. "Auntie, you don't have to worry about Dad. He always comes back safely." Finally, I gathered the courage to ask, "Why did your dad choose me to take care of you?" "Dad says you're beautiful, intelligent, gentle, understanding, and kind." Those were words Gu Jun had said about the woman he wanted to marry. A warm current surged through me. So, those words were meant for me. How did Dad meet me? Xiaohu whispered mysteriously in my ear. "The principal is Uncle Wang's dad." Even the 300,000 was contributed by Grandpa Wang. It was outrageous, his dad hugging and crying over something so outrageous. What about the car? The car was a gift from Grandpa when he heard Dad was getting married. Dad repaid Grandpa Wang, and with the rest, he bought the car, saying it would be safer. Xiaohu told me that he had been saved by Gu Jun from human traffickers and had been helping him search for his parents. That night, I couldn't sleep. Gu Jun kept appearing in my mind, the slideshow of our life over the past few months playing over and over again, each image exaggerated in my mind. I even started to think that the way he looked at me was full of tenderness and affection, just like the way I had once looked at Songshan Arai. It had been a long time since I thought of that classmate from Songshan Arai. A long time. Long enough that he was no longer the standard for my partner, no longer my white moonlight or vermilion mole. He had become just a tourist spot, just a name on a map. Now, the only thing I was worried about was Gu Jun's safety. I feared for his safety. It was the first time I felt such heart-wrenching worry, even jumping at the sound of my phone ringing, afraid it was news about him. Thankfully, this period only lasted for half a year. Gu Jun returned to us in one piece. He was tanned and thinner, and he calmly said to me, "Xiao Xiao, I've finished filming." I cried and rushed into his arms. "I missed you so much." He froze for a while before finally hugging me back, but his first words were, "Xiaohu, did you bully Auntie?" Sigh. Was it so hard to say something affectionate? I didn't want to argue. That evening, I brought my luggage from the guest room. His ears turned red again, and his gaze was direct and unmasked. "You still haven't told me what your ideal partner is like." I was sure his emotional intelligence wasn't high, so I just answered straightforwardly. "Songshan Arai is part of my past, but you are my present and future." Every day, I would take Xiaohu to school, help him with homework, wash clothes, and cook. I felt like I was becoming a mother. Gu Jun handed me his salary card, and for the first time, I felt like we were a normal couple just like most families in China. He would massage my lower back and fuss over me not wearing high heels, which felt just like a man's love for a woman. "No matter what you look like, I love you." Songshan Arai seemed so far, yet so close. As I whispered to him, "Don't worry about joining the group. I'll take good care of the kids and the house, waiting for you to come back." His brilliant eyes reflected my figure. He held me tight in his arms, rubbing his chin against my head. "I may not be able to give you flowers and romance, but I promise, as long as you don't leave, I will never abandon you." I didn't think too much about it. As long as he was safe, that was enough. The days ahead might be calm or turbulent, full of challenges or danger, but as long as he came home safely every time, I wouldn't care about anything else. 2 years later, I gave birth to a daughter. When my daughter was 5, we moved again, disappearing once more into the sea of people.